Timber, a living product that serves us in every way. When alive, it converts carbon monoxide into oxygen and then becomes a key structural material for buildings, boats, utilities, and a host of other wonderful uses. And perhaps the most stunning application is when it's laid as a timber floor like this. It feels and looks great, has a natural richness and beauty, adding value to any property. Knowing the size of the room is important. Simply multiply the width by the length, in this case 4 metres by 3.6 metres, and you have a total area of 14.4 square metres. So for a room size of 14.4 square metres, we would require one 4-litre can. Like all do-it-yourself projects, safety is paramount. Follow all instructions carefully. Wear a dust mask, safety glasses and earplugs. Unplug sanding equipment when not in use or when changing papers. Keep machinery away from children. Keep all power leads out of the path of sanding equipment. Store all sawdust out and away from the house as it is extremely combustible. Ensure rooms to be coated are well ventilated. Use a circuit breaker between your power point and machinery. Make sure all gas pilot lights are off. You will need the following equipment if you want your floors to look just like a professional job. A drum or belt sanding machine. An edging sander. Orbital sander. Hammer and nail punch. Putty knife and putty. Wonder bar or pinchers to remove tacks and staples. A scraper to do the corners of the rooms. Sandpaper for drum or belt sander and edger. You will need 40, 60, 80, 100 and 120 grit papers. 24 grit papers are only required if the floor is in very bad condition. Vacuum cleaner. Dust mask, safety glasses and earplugs. Garbage bags to empty the sawdust into. Remove all existing floor coverings. Carefully remove all staples and tacks, being careful not to dent the timber. Ensure the floor is free from wax, grease, silicone, oils and glues, as these will clog up the sandpaper and may cause the coating to be rejected. Punch all nails 3 millimeters below the surface of the timber, but do not putty until later in the sanding process. Just before you begin, a couple of checks to make sure everything is in order. Replace any boards that are damaged, spongy, buckled or warped. Check your equipment list to make sure you have everything. Make sure you know how to operate the machinery. Your rental dealer can provide you with instructions on operation and changing papers. And you may wish to hang heavy sheets or plastic in the doorway to stop dust entering other rooms. Before we start, here's some helpful hints and tips. Begin sanding in a low visibility area, like where a sofa or wall unit would sit. It is not necessary to remove skirting boards. Just take care when sanding and edging so as to not scratch them. If you have to replace damaged boards, expect some colour variation. Stains may not always be completely removed with sanding. Badly stained boards should be replaced. Black Japani, a dark stain found in older houses around the edges of a room or hallways, can generally be removed with sanding. However, there will be a slight two-tone effect on the finished boards. Do not leave out any of the sanding stages and sanding papers, as each one serves an individual and progressive purpose. The final appearance of your floor is greatly influenced by the evenness and smoothness once the sanding is done, so take care during the sanding process. Never start or stop the sanding machine while the sandpaper belt is in contact with the floor. Tilt the machine on its rollers to lift the belt off the floor before you turn it on or before you turn the machine around or stop. Once the sanding machine is started, slowly move the sander forward, gradually lowering it so the sanding belt makes contact with the timber. To stop or turn the machine around, gradually tilt the sander up to lift the sanding belt off the floor. A couple of words of caution. Starting or stopping the sander while the sanding belt is in contact with the floor may create dip or gouge marks on the timber. And change sandpaper regularly. Clogged or worn out papers may lead to burn marks on the timber. If your floor is very rough, uneven, cupped, rounded, has thick Japani staining or is very dirty, then you will have to start with a 24 grit paper. If on the other hand the floor is new or in good condition, then you start with a 40 grit paper. Start sanding at 45 degrees to the grain of the timber. Once the room has been sanded in both directions, start sanding with the grain of the timber. Always sand the floor in longest possible lengths. Now use the edging machine in a left to right semicircular motion. Sand the edges of the room with 40 grit paper. Change the paper to 60 grit and sand with the grain. Also using the edging machine with 60 grit paper, sand the edges of the room. Vacuum the floor thoroughly. Change papers to a 120 grit paper. Finish off the sanding using orbital sander with 120 to 150 grit paper. This is the crucial stage, so ensure all sanding marks are removed and that the edging work blends in with the rest of the room. Vacuum the floor thoroughly. It is important to make the floor and room as dust-free as possible to minimise the dust that can settle on the wet coating. Also wipe and vacuum skirting, walls, windowsills and anywhere where dust can settle. The equipment you will need to coat your timber floor is an orbital sander, 120 to 200 grit fine sandpaper, a short nap mohair roller, a good quality paintbrush, vacuum cleaner, and of course safety equipment, gloves, mask and safety glasses. Before you can apply the finish, ensure the floor is clean by using a lint-free tack cloth. All coatings apply and dry best when everything is at the same optimum temperature. Always clean new brushes and rollers before use to remove any loose fibres which could end up in your finish. When applying the finish, try not to work the finish too much or go over the same area too many times, as this may create air bubbles. Good ventilation, temperature and humidity are important for proper curing of the finish. To check if the finish is dry enough for another coat, lightly sand an inconspicuous area, and if it powders up and doesn't clog the sandpaper, then the surface is ready for another coat. Finally, too many coats or coats applied too thick may cause drying and curing problems. Follow the instructions on the can. Before we can start, we must ensure the floor is completely dust-free. Look for dust in other areas like window sills where dust can settle on the wet floors. The optimum temperature for application, drying and curing is in the range of 15 to 30 degrees and 40 to 75% humidity. The floor should now be properly sanded. And ensure you know how to use the machinery. Your rental dealer can provide you with instructions on use and changing papers. Remove curtains and drapes to prevent any accidental damage. Use a paintbrush to apply finish to the edges and hard to reach areas. Apply the first coat of the finish. Be sure to follow instructions on the can label. Apply the finish in the direction of the timber grain, working on 4 to 5 boards at a time, keeping a wet edge to help minimise lap lines. Here's a couple of worthwhile tips. Apply even coats that are not too thin or too thick, as this gives the best results and allows the finish to dry properly. Allow a longer drying time if weather is cold, very humid or wet. Avoid going over the same area too much with the roller or applicator, as this may create air bubbles and affect the levelling of the finish. When the finish is dry, the floor may look patchy and feel prickly and rough due to raised timber fibres. Lightly sand the floor using orbital sander or by hand with 150 to 200 grit paper. Make sure the sanding is even throughout. Don't allow the sandpaper to clog up with sanding dust when sanding back the floor, as this may cause swirl marks in the finish. Check the paper regularly for build-up and change paper often. Vacuum the floor thoroughly. Wipe the floor over to remove any remaining dust. Apply the second coat of finish in the same manner as the first. When dry, vacuum to remove fine dust particles between coats. Lightly sand only with 180 to 200 grit paper if recoating is greater than 48 hours or if the surface is still very rough. Apply the third coat of finish in the same manner as the first and second coat. If you require a satin finish, substitute the third coat of gloss finish with satin finish, taking care to apply satin finish evenly. After 24 hours of laying the coating, it should be ready for light traffic. No shoes, socks only. Wait about a week until coating is dried and cured before you walk on it in street shoes and before you use any cleaning products. A drum or belt sanding machine. An edging sander. Orbital sander. Hammer and nail punch. A scraper. Sandpaper for drum or belt sander and edger. Vacuum cleaner. Dust mask, safety glasses and earplugs. Garbage bags to empty the sawdust into. A short nap mohair roller. A good quality paintbrush. Before you begin, punch all nails 3 millimeters below the surface of the timber. Using a scraper, scrape clean the corners of the decking. Thoroughly clean the timber by sanding, removing dirt, dust, wax, oil, grease, mildew, fungi and algae. If you have to wash down with a hose, allow 2 to 3 days to dry. Check to see that you have all the equipment you require. If you are sanding the decking, make sure you know how to operate the machinery. Your rental dealer can provide you with instructions on operating and how to change papers.